Hello, welcome to another episode of Varsity360. I'm Columbian sports editor Micah Rice with a special guest today. We are joined by Jordan Nailon, the founder of Blast Zone Media and longtime Southwest Washington sports reporter. We are here to talk about your new independent media venture. We're here to talk about high school sports in Southwest Washington and why we both believe that covering it is so important, and kind of how high school sports are kind of in the fabric of these communities that we've spent so much time and energy in. But before we get into that, we're coming to you again from the First Pacific Financial Studio. Thanks again to First Pacific Financial for supporting the show, for supporting high school sports and the community at large. And thank you, Jordan, for driving south from Cowlitz County. First of all, Blast Zone Media, I love the concept. I love the name, but mostly I love the idea that there's another voice out there covering high school sports in Southwest Washington. Tell me about how you got started with Blast Zone Media.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and it is my pleasure to venture south across the county line. Always a pleasure, always an experience, and awful fancy down here. You know, we're up in the sticks in the official Blast Zone, which is a project that I put together this summer and launched in the fall. We are covering high school sports, community college sports in the lower Columbia region, but also into Northwest Oregon. The way I like to describe it is if people where you come from tell stories about having to wipe off ash from your windshield, you are in the Blast Zone. Okay, if they had to dredge it out of the river that runs through your town, again, clearly in the Blast Zone. That runs all the way out to the coast. We can't forget our Ilwaco, Nacelle friends all the way out there. And kind of like you touched on, the reason that I was motivated to do this is that I was lucky enough to grow up in a time when there were all sorts of local media of different sorts covering local sports. And that was not limited to high school varsity sports. That, my first taste of it would have been in Little League sports. In fact, when I launched this, I did some traditional radio ads, and I made sure to lead. Hey, I was a 1998 state champion for Central Bambino. And if you're from the Longview, Kelso area, you know that, that's a big deal. Central doesn't exist anymore. And so we had to beat our arch rivals, Western, at Kelso. So it's and that was covered by the local newspaper. Okay. And so that made it feel like we were 12 years old. It felt like we were in the major leagues. And I grew up to have some perspective on that, and I realized what an undertaking that was to send, great sports reporters to go follow some 12-year-olds around at the ball fields, and how much that meant to us. And that carried on through high school, and then, if you're lucky enough to keep playing college and whatever. So I was saddened to see that tradition had started to slip away a little bit, without going too much into that. And I was, I felt like I was in the prime position to try to maintain and carry that flag forward.
Yeah, that's excellent. And I think you touched on something really important in that we've sort of seen seismic shifts in the news industry, especially local news. And now we have these concepts that are kind of known as news deserts. And that extends to sports, where there's communities you can go around the state that an athlete can go 4 years starting on varsity and probably never talk to a newspaper, see their name in print. And not to say that what we do has to be in the old form of print journalism. What you do is completely online. But I think having local independent coverage of our communities, and we can talk about why high school sports in particular important in the communities, but I just feel very fortunate that not only that we're able to do that as a local independent news outlet here in Clark County, but that you have taken that model and see the value in that up in Cowlitz County.
Oh, absolutely. And make no bones about it, I'm a traditional newsprint guy at heart. If I could own my own, news press and just Benjamin Franklin this thing, I absolutely would. I just don't have the storage space for it.
Right.
That's the biggest hurdle. But yeah, ink definitely runs through my veins, and I love what you guys have continued to do down here. I think there's all the value in the world to be able to hold it in your hand and tuck it away for later to look at and share. All those things. I mean, I have a trunk full of newspapers at home. Maybe I was a weird kid, but I documented all that stuff, and it's fun for me to look through it today. That being said, we don't have a print form. We do make an e-edition so that we can present things in the traditional form of a newspaper. And it's a fun opportunity for our readers. We try to do that once a week, and it gives people another chance to see everything that's happened. And as you well know, placement on the page also communicates some information to you. Mm-hmm. And when it's on the front, and it's on the top of the front in the center in color, it's probably a pretty big deal. And so whether you make that page or you make the 12th page on the back, for your bowling scores, whatever, we got you there. We have a place for you there. And all of it is important because whatever your niche is in the community, those are the people that and those are the things that are important to you.
Well, I've kind of gone through a process and sort of over the 25 years now that I've been in the journalism business to kind of arrive where it wasn't a straight road to arrive where I'm at. When I first joined the Columbian straight out of college in 1999, we had a full-time Portland Trailblazers reporter. We had a reporter that went to the college football games down in Eugene, up in Seattle, even driving over to Pullman every now and then. And it was really like we were still trying to be a regional newspaper. At that time, it was a viable thing. Then as the course of the industry happened, a lot of downsizing, a lot of staff cuts, a lot of budget cuts. When I took over as sports editor about 13 years ago, I had to confront a question: what should we do and what can we do? And what should we do? The answer was easy. We should be telling stories that no one else is telling. Absolutely. It doesn't make any sense to go up to Husky Stadium or go up to cover the Seahawks when there's 20 different versions of that story available to anybody online. But what we can do is go to the gym down the road and tell a story, find someone in your community that maybe has a universal element about them that's an example of bravery. That's an example of overcoming adversity. That's an example of making their community better. Absolutely. And so that's really how I got here to be at the point where what we do in covering high school sports, I feel really good about the role that plays in the community.
It really clarifies things when you're trying to sort through the master schedule of everything that's going to happen in the grand, the overall sports world, is where you can see that you are and your crew is set up to tell that story the best. And no one else is going to know about that story. Maybe somebody else will pick up on that story, and that's great, and they can carry it forward, but they might not know about it unless you spend the time to get to know those people. And I try to with Blast Zone Media, we cover a lot of small schools. We have 1B, a ton of 2B schools over in Oregon. They're also two of the smallest classifications, but they make it impossible for us to ignore them. They compete at a very high level. They have a great tradition. They have great fan support and readership. And, nobody else is going to tell that story. That's their Apple Cup. That's, those are the things that bind them together. And whether it's the Highway 30 hootenanny over in Oregon country, as I like to call it, or the 8 Mile War with Kalama coming down to Woodland or vice versa, those are big time events in those communities. And it's not just about the games. It's about the people who come back and the people, as I go around the gyms in the area, you get to know the same faces that are going to be there. And I always tell them, it's a pleasure to have something to depend on. These people who are opening the doors and selling the tickets and handing out the programs, and the coaches you get to talk to, because those become our relationships and our community. And it's important. It is really important to be in there. And sometimes those rivalries, this is the unique aspect that I think people overlook, is sometimes people shy away from the competitiveness of those rivalries, and sometimes they get nasty, and I understand where like the heart of those concerns, but the core of that is bringing their own people together.
Yes.
Tighter.
Yes.
Right. And so that's what I think the charm of those events is that they can have a commonality. And if you just decide that those people are your enemy tonight,
just tonight,
yeah, that's great. It amplifies the experience. The big time is where you're at.
Well, I think we were talking before we went on here that you have just a unique perspective in that you've worked previously not only in Longview, but also in Centralia and the surrounding environs that you talk about, going to Toledo or Tenino or Adna or some of these towns that maybe you don't know they're there unless you see their name on the sign on I-5 as you go between. Exit, right? Yeah, exactly. But I guess, it's about those, those people and those relationships, and how you were telling me it was even a little bit of a competitive rivalry between the papers where you worked at in Centralia and Longview to see who could cover some of those border schools a little bit better.
Yeah, the coverage areas don't overlap in a ton of spots, but where they did, specifically Winlock and Toledo, those were fighting grounds. We were competitive. When I was with one paper, I was competitive for them, and then when we went to the other one, then it was our story to get, and we also had a story share, so you could just share them back and forth. But that wasn't the point. The point was to be the first one and know it first and get it out there and do the best job. And I think that gets to the heart of, it's not an industry where there being another entity there to cover it is bad.
No.
This isn't a zero-sum game in that regard. It sharpened us to be better reporters, to try to beat our competitors. Athletes get it, coaches get it. That's what makes them sharp, is they have someone to beat every night. And so that can be the same. You want to do the best job. You want to look and see what the other stories are, and did you do an adequate job? Did you get it right? Did you get it on time? And that just makes you better. It doesn't make you better or worse. It's just they're friendly, competitive rivalries as they should be. And so, to circle back around, to see some of those areas seceded, to where so much time and energy had been put in to maintain those front lines of coverage area. As an old time newsie, that really that broke my heart, just because it's good. Those little towns, it's not like they're getting too much coverage, right? And so it's just sad to see when they do lose someone. At the same time, when I was in Longview, I saw the Columbian was expanding coverage, coming up. I think all the way to Castle Rock, definitely through Longview and Kelso. And even though that's not your primary area, I think it's great that those kids are also getting recognized down here. That your readers can be familiar with their names, because that only heightens your experience when you're going to go to a game and you don't have to say, who is their best player? What is this team? Are they good? You've got some perspective on it, and that it makes for a better experience all the way around.
Well, and I've never thought that, we should be competitive, and I want more people to cover high school sports.
Absolutely.
There's a limitless, we're never going to tell every story that's out there, but if you're telling stories and we're telling stories that are different or even have some overlap, we're we're going to present a fuller picture of these communities, these kids, and these schools. A story that comes to mind is one that Meg Wachnick did on the Kelso quarterback this last year, Tucker Amrine, and some of the health challenges that he had overcome. And like you said, maybe we don't have the highest readership in Kelso, although now with the internet, of course, we can read about, there's not that old geographic boundaries, but someone who maybe is a fan of Evergreen or Mountain View or Heritage, they're like, oh, that's that Kelso quarterback. And instead of being a faceless, nameless person, he's like, oh, that's the kid that overcame that health issue and wants to become a pilot when he grows up. I know a little bit about him now.
It's good to be able to humanize the gladiators out there for our entertainment. And that's a great example. Meg does a great job with those stories to kind of overlap between school and sports and community, and Tucker and the whole Amrine family you couldn't have picked a better tree to go pluck from, just ripe there all the time. But historically there's not a lot of that overlap, and you're right that online that provides us an opportunity to kind of talk about those other schools in a way that provides more information to readers than when you're just sending them to a mailbox at the end of a dusty road, which, again, I still am pro delivering at the end of the dusty road. But the Woodland rivalry, that's a fun one that I'm glad that we get to share. They are such a fun story to watch down there. I'm probably jumping ahead in your scheduled events to talk about, but anytime you've got a player who could put up a stat line like 37 points and 28 rebounds like Kennedy Bacher did earlier this year, that's must-see entertainment every night. She's putting up double-doubles that come across in the box score as like an underperformance, and that tells you that you set quite a high standard, and so it's fun. It's fun for the small schools to read about that and have something to compare that to, and they get to read about your 4A Titans down here and Papermakers. It's just a different worlds that maybe they wouldn't necessarily know anything about. Nacel's not going to make it out to Union anytime soon, but they can know a little bit about them.
Yeah, and maybe there's a recruit that goes and speak of Union, be like, I remember watching Lincoln Victor when he led Union to the state championship, and then following his journey that ended up with him at Washington State and playing on Saturdays, and kind of how he represented that community. But I think next place I want to go is you and I both, I think, have unique perspectives on what high school sports mean. For me, having a daughter or two daughters that have gone through, one who's a freshman in college, but ran cross country and track, not the fastest, but had a wonderful experience just with, for her, the biggest thing was being the seventh runner on varsity, as a senior in lettering. She's never going to get her name in the paper, but it allowed me to see how important high school sports are for the people that don't even, you don't have to be a star to have a really positive experience in high school athletics. And that goes to the parents. I've met people who are parents of other athletes that I would have never met in otherwise. You met your wife through high school sports. Maybe talk about that a little bit.
That's true. We actually went to school together, parted ways, and thought that was just that. But then through the course of taking scores over the phone when she was the head coach at Toledo volleyball, we were able to reconnect. And for a while, didn't even know really that I knew because I had the roster, but I didn't reveal my true identity until it seemed like a good time. I was very strategic about it. And then many years later, here we are. We're married and with children, and I am in the unique position to be the editor of a publication who covers my wife's volleyball team, as she is the head coach at R.A. Long. volleyball. And, you know, it always makes for I've always got to play my cards correct. I don't want Mark Morris thinking, you know, it's hard. It's a hard world out there to make everybody happy, but, you know, it's worth it. And that it brought us together. It was something that, you know, talking about like old school habits and practices. You know, we were taking almost all of our phone calls and all of our scores over the phone at that time. And if we'd just been sending emails back and forth, you know, who knows? Who knows what the world is like today? So, but that's one of those connections. You know, that's a very unique one, and not everybody's going to marry every coach that calls in, thankfully. But
that would be a little weird.
That would be a little weird. But it is a great example of just the fact that, you know, we were able to talk on a different level that allowed me to learn more about her team and beyond just the wins and losses. As I recall, there were probably a lot of losses, more than she would want me to talk about for that Toledo team. But I was able to learn about the nature of her kids, what they were trying to overcome. And those stories, while maybe they don't get as big of headlines, they're just as important to those kids who are going through it. You know, it's kind of a luck of the draw, where you're born, how many other kids are born, and where they move by the time you hit the 4-year window where you are eligible to compete, or 5 years for the 1Bs and 2Bs. But it's helped me out to be in that tradition of taking phone calls and creating those relationships. Is helped me out in my career as I've moved from one publication to another, to the great frontier of the Wild West internet age. Those relationships have always been at the root of it. And now I am in a position where I can learn about the teams that they're gonna be playing. I can call old sources from up north in Lewis County and find out, hey, what's the scoop? What do you got? What do you know about this team? Are they as good as they read on paper? That's where you get the real information, where people are comfortable to talk to you. They know that you are in it for the right reasons, that you're not going to misrepresent them, and that really the heart of what we're doing is to create a better experience, a more whole experience for student athletes.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And that takes a lot of trust. Some people don't do it correctly, and then that can burn bridges and cause hurt feelings and rifts through the community that last a long time. And so you do have to be wary. These aren't professional athletes. These aren't D1 college athletes who are getting paid, you know, to hit the transfer portal yet. Big asterisks on the yet, but but even then, those still at their heart be community stories, right? And so that's why I know some coaches probably get sick of me because I'm on like, hey, what are the stats from your game? You know, and they're like, we lost by a lot. Like, I understand, but I'm not here to try to make anyone feel bad about losing by a lot. I still think that there's stories to be told even when you lose, and knowing those stories and kind of the low times helps you to really appreciate it when the good times come back around.
Well, you know, because it's, you know, you talk about that trust. It might be the conversation starts about with, hey, I saw you lost by 20, you know, that's a bummer. Tell me about it. It might end with, oh, by the way, we got this kid who's number like 8th on the depth chart, who, you know, had cancer last year, or
you never know.
I think one example I can cite is start of this year. I just picked a random volleyball game. It was Battleground and Hudson's Bay, two teams that probably aren't going to be near the top of the standings. In fact, one of the reasons I wanted to go out was that Battleground had announced that they were going to play an independent schedule because they weren't, they didn't feel like they could really, you know, match with Camas, Union, and Skyview, and wanted it to be a better experience for their kids to play a more independent schedule, to play more small schools. Well, throughout the course of talking to people in the interviews, I learned that really the battleground volleyball team, because the coach's daughter, and she was open about this, had committed suicide a couple years or earlier the previous year. Pretty well known around the school and everything. I'm not breaking any news or divulging any secrets here, but the team had made the decision amongst itself that they were going to put wins and losses second and focus their season on developing mental health coping strategies and having, come together as a community and help each other out to make sure that if you're going through something that you're going to have people around you and that will have your back and that you can lean on. And it's something like that you just never know until you actually go out into the gym what kind of story you're going to find.
Right. That story's not going to come find you. It's difficult to talk about, but that it's hugely important. It's hugely important, and at its heart and at its best, that's exactly what sports should be doing for kids, is providing them a positive model and kind of a system to operate in to create those bonds and those friendships that will, and not all of them will last, but you just need a few that do, and it can teach you. It can teach you so many things, even when it's bad. The great experiences are great, and they're full of glory, and their trophies are awesome, all of that. But even in the darkest, there's times, the longest losing streaks and all that. There's things that can stick with these kids that maybe it wasn't fun day to day plugging away at it, but once you step away from it, it's rarely those those wins and loss totals that stick with you. It's the bus rides, and the overnights and the team stuff. The team stuff. I had a coach in summer ball, Dave Orzel, who always, the very first day of practice, he would make us all introduce ourselves to each other, and then at the end he would say, "You don't understand why this is important, but these are going to be your friends for the rest of your life, and even if they're not your friends, if you see them broke down on the side of the road 30 years from now, you're going to stop and go help them out because you guys were teammates once." And that matters. That matters. In a world that doesn't present you with a lot of opportunities to create bonds like that, sports are really special in that way, where they provide you so many opportunities to create those bonds that hopefully can carry on.
I still talk to people I knew in high school that I played sports with, and we never lack for a conversation starter. We can always be those old guys reminiscing.
But you just pick it right up, right where you left off.
Yeah, it's almost like going back in a time machine. But I think you touch on something really important, that these are unique to competing. These bonds that you form are often unique to competing for your school and not a club. Yeah. And you see this over and over, where in a lot of sports, whether it's softball or soccer, volleyball, gymnastics, the club scene, or even basketball, AAU, or football, 7-on-7, there's a vibrant and busy competition slate and circuit outside of the school. But there's something about competing with people that you see in the hall, that you grow up usually in the same neighborhood with, that representing a base of people that goes beyond the guys or girls in that locker room. And that's why it always kind of, I hope we never get to this point where sort of the club stuff, where athletes eschew the high school experience to focus primarily on club because they think it'll raise their stock.
Oh, you nailed it on that. I mean, winning is fun no matter what the game is, but there is a richness to it when it's for your school, for your community. And I think, like you said, it has to do with knowing the people who are on the team. You've grown up envisioning that moment, hitting that shot, that half-court shot in the driveway, or, whatever it is, hitting the home run in the bottom of the ninth. You just walk through all those scenarios, and it's your friends from those Little League teams and those YMCA teams that you remember, that you're envisioning doing it with. And the part that really sweetens the deal that you probably don't have any perspective for as a kid is the way that what it means to alumni.
Yes.
And the reason that the stands are filled with people that you don't know. And maybe those people come up to you after the game and want to shake your hand, pat you on the back and say good job, and you have no idea who that person is, but somebody does.
Yeah.
And there's a reason that they're there. And there's a reason that it's important to them to see those, traditions continue. And nobody's going to, show up for your passing league championship like that.
There ain't no student section at the AAU game.
That's true.
Yeah.
And as important as that stuff is to development, it's just winning for your town it just checks all the boxes.
Yes.
And it makes everybody come out of the woodwork. Everybody's tuned in on the radio and watching live and traveling across the mountains to get to these big games. And, you can really feel it in the wins and you can feel it in the losses. Like the collective heartbreak because everybody got their hopes up together. Yeah. And that's an important communal experience.
Yeah, I think you and I have both spent a lot of time kind of in the eaves of the Yakima Valley Sun Dome at the state basketball championships for the small schools, and the collective feeling after a win versus the collective feeling after a loss, where everybody's kind of waiting around for their friends, their brothers, their sisters, their kids to come out, and it's a little longer after a loss, and it's this, and you that's when you see that this stuff matters.
Yeah, when you can see the end.
Yes.
Yeah, it hits them like a ton of bricks, and that's nobody ever imagines that end.
Mm-hmm. But for all but one team, that is the end.
Exactly. There's no shame in it. It's just that it catches everybody off guard because when your team is hot and you make it that far, it feels like the Cinderella story is destined. It's got to be, and that sort of belief is what it's all about. That's what it's all about. That's when you know that you're doing it right and the team is putting out a great product, and it's what we love to see.
Yeah. Well, let's wrap this up by circling back to Blast Zone Media. Tell me where people can find you, where they can follow you, where it's a subscription model, so it's definitely worth. I bought myself a year subscription. Good value for what we get from it, which is a lot. So just tell people where they can find you.
Okay. So we're online at blastzonemedia.com. It's through Substack, so if you use that, we're easy to find on there. If you don't, you can just go straight to the website. It's just whatever is a preference for you. Once you become a subscriber, you get emails of all of our recent stories. They come directly to you. That's our delivery box at the end of the dusty road,
yes,
if you will. And then we do have nightly scores. Those are free just to get those out there so you can kind of know and keep your eye on the big games of the night. And then we do comprehensive, in-depth roundups with quotes and stats from all of the coaches throughout the area. Right now, obviously, basketball is getting a ton of attention, rightly so, but we try to be equally dedicated to the other sports that are happening. So wrestling, we just put out our weekly wrestling roundup. We've done a number of wrestling features this year. We cover swimming. We cover bowling. We've got our local league bowling scores in there. Shout out to Triangle Bowl.
Yes.
So, which I've got to get down to Big Owls down here.
It's the antithesis of the old smoky bowling alley. Big Owls is big. It's bright.
It's big. Okay.
It's huge.
Oh, okay. I had a different picture in my brain. I still got to get there. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, that's where we're at. We're on pretty much all the social medias. I've got my intern at home working on that. My wife loves it when I call her the intern.
Oh, no.
So, you can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Instagram. I'm on Twitter at The Daily Nailon, and Blast Zone Media is also on Twitter, so you can find what we're covering, what we've covered, who's going to be there, what to look for. We just tried to do a whole comprehensive slice of what's going on in the area.
All right, we love it. Brothers in the same mission here, telling the stories that matter to the communities here in Southwest Washington. Thank you, Jordan, for making the time and making the journey down south here into Clark County. I'm sure we'll cross paths at the gym or on the baseball field in the spring.
Guaranteed.
All right, thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next week.